Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, returning guest. His name is Makia Freeman. First name is spelled Makia, last name Freeman. I had him on my show about a month ago in late April. We talked about his book, The International Satanic Network Exposed. Survivors reveal names of presidents, prime ministers, and royals. And that's one of my most listened to shows recently. So I'll put a link to that prior show. But when I was talking to him after that show, he mentioned that he had another book. And that title of that book, and if you can see the cover, if you're watching this on Rockfin, Rumble, or X, the full title is Break Your Chains, Exposing the Grand Conspiracy and Presenting the Way Out. I believe it was published in 2023. And it's broken up into two parts. It's pretty cool because it addresses the problems, but it actually provides solutions. So it's not just a bunch of doom, but actually a way out and remedies for the kind of situation the world's in. But I also was in the interim between this month or 30 days. I saw that he was also on Charlie Robinson's Macroaggressions, talking about the Frankist kind of movement, which I think is really relevant to where we are in the world. Some of these people are not. They are Jews, but they do not practice Old Testament Judaism, which is kind of deceptive. But I will put a link to that so you can listen to that as well. But again, we're going to talk today about this book, Break Your Chains, Exposing the Grand Conspiracy and Presenting the Way Out. And it's Makia Freeman. So Makia, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me on, man. Appreciate it.
Cool. So for people who may not have heard our last show, maybe you can do kind of a brief overview of your writing. I know you have other books. And then what led up to the most recent publication of Break Your Chains.
Sure. So I've written actually 4 books now, but 2 of them are in print and well known on Amazon. Break Your Chains, which we're going to discuss today. And then in the last interview I did with you, we discussed the International Satanic Network Exposed. And so in that interview, I encourage people to go back and listen to it. But basically, we covered aspects of the Satanic Network and how they operate worldwide. I mean, it is centered in the Atlantic and in North America and Europe, but it's a worldwide network. There are whistleblowers and victims from all around the world. There's some from Australia, for example, and they're all saying the same kind of thing. They're naming the same people, and they're talking about what happens in these rituals where they're basically kidnapped as a child. They're inducted into this network, and there's various roles some of them play. Some of them are actually groomed to become facilitators, orchestrators of the rituals in these network, and it's incredible what they have to go through, the incredible amount of pain and torture and abuse. But some of them have gone through it and lived to tell the story and escaped alive. And so thanks to them and other researchers, we've been able to piece together what this network is, who's involved, where they are doing it, and what it all means.
Gotcha. So that's an important one. I know I've like done some of the similar research as you, talked to a lot of different people, and these stories corroborated, which it's really, I would not have believed it 15, 20 years ago, but now it's like this really is happening. But what led up to the publication of this book? Break Your Chains is your most recent book, is that correct?
No, it's actually, this one was published in 2023, about July, halfway through the year. This one's 700 pages or more. It's actually much longer than the International Satanic Network Exposed. And this was, at the time, my largest book. I mean, I'm working on another one now that may turn out to be larger or of a similar size. But basically, this came about because I'd been writing articles on the freedomarticles.com, which is my main website. And I wanted to actually put it all together into a book. And a lot of people over the years had said to me, I just had a lot of comments with people like, well, okay, we know what the problem is. You keep talking about all the negativity and blah, blah, blah. What are we going to do about it? And so I designed this book deliberately to have the first half talking about the dire straits that humanity is in, the serious trouble we're in. But then the second half is dedicated to all the different solutions that we can do. So the idea is that it gives people hope, and that finishes on an uplifting note. And hopefully it's going to empower people to know that they can do something about this.
Right. And you talked kind of about these concepts right at the beginning. The New World Order, which some people dispute, is actually kind of a real concept. They don't think that other people are plotting to reformat the world. But when you start looking at these elites, that same terminology keeps popping up. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And so in Break Your Chains, I have to take, I felt like the best way to do this was to take the first half of the book and lay out what the problem is, And the reason for that is because if people don't understand that there's a real problem and they still think the New World Order is some crazy conspiracy theory or it's science fiction or it's some Hollywood movie, they're not going to take it seriously, and they're not going to realize that actually, no, this is a real plan by real people for world domination and to set up a world government, not a benign world government that's representative of people and that's going to be taking into account all the different nations and people's desires. No. A very, very controlled, hierarchical, totalitarian world government. It's been planned actually for quite a long time now. The evidence is undeniable, and we're coming into actually the final stages of where they're putting it into place. And so I try to give people as much evidence as I can without it being an encyclopedia and overwhelming, so they understand the problem. And then once you understand some of the problem, hopefully then you're motivated to want to take part in the solutions.
Right, and it is interesting, like it's kind of coming into my mind's eye, like we are in a World War III environment. It doesn't fit World War II or World War I, but it's also something reflected in your book is this, like this really is a different type of warfare. You mentioned 4G or 5G. Can you kind of explain to people why you wrote that chapter about like we're already there?
Yeah, I feel like that's an important chapter. Thanks for asking about that. So in World War I, it was distinguished by certain characteristics. The technology had only advanced a certain way. So there was a lot of trench warfare, for example. There weren't fighter jets yet, and there weren't certain kind of automatic weapons and certain missiles and bombs. And so it was fought in a certain way. But by the time World War II came around, the way that World War I had been fought was completely obsolete. There would have been no point doing that kind of trench warfare if your enemy had fighter jets where they could just bomb you. So as technology advances, obviously warfare changes. And so now, 1945 is exactly 80 years ago. So if we look at the way that World War II was fought, fighting that war today wouldn't make any sense. So that's the first point. If you look at the wars that are happening around the world today, obviously a lot of them are using the latest technology, and that's drones, and not just single drones, but drone swarms where you have 50, 100, thousands of these things flying together in formation and doing certain things. And then a lot of it becomes about how advanced technologically and electronically you are. So the Russians, for example, are trying to gain the edge there and trying to jam the radar signals and jam the communication systems of the Ukrainian drones. And so all this stuff is going on. But there's another whole aspect to war which people might not associate with war, and that is war in the economic and the political domains. Because if you look at what the US has been doing to Russia ever since really the 2014 coup, they've been trying to put sanctions on them and isolate them economically from the rest of the world. And that didn't really work. They thought they could put Russia down and kind of bring her down to a certain level, but Russia turned out to be actually pretty strong and resilient, and it made all these other networks set up, it accelerated the growth of BRICS and did all this other stuff so that it can't be economically punished by the US, and it won't hurt it if the US tries to do that. So that's another whole aspect. But what we're really talking about when we get to 4G or 5G, fourth generation or fifth generation warfare, is actually realizing that the real target of all of these wars is the average citizen. It's you. And I don't mean just an American or a Ukrainian or a Russian, in every country, because really the war that we're facing is the war of governments against their own citizens. It's the war of the ruling class against the ruled. And often these wars have a performative aspect. This is what George Orwell spoke about in 1984. He spoke about how there were three ruling powers, and they actually almost propped each other up with all their wars. And so the war wasn't to, as it might have been in the past, to assert your supremacy over the other group or nation or to gain territory. It was actually just to keep the status quo. And they used each other. It was beneficial for East Asia and Eurasia and Oceania to all have another enemy, because then they could say to their populations, hey, we're at war with Eurasia. We need you to contribute to the war effort, and we need you to make bombs and missiles and all this stuff. And then it would give people kind of a strong leadership to unite behind, and it would provide an excuse to burn up the excess surplus of society, which Orwell also spoke about, because the ruling class don't want the people that are ruled to become too prosperous, to become too well off, and to move up the ladder from lower to middle to upper class. So what do they do with all the stuff that's been made? Or people are going to work every day, most days of the week and producing all this stuff? Well, they've got to get rid of it somehow. Well, war is the perfect way to do that. It also encourages depopulation, obviously. And so war serves all these functions that don't have anything to do with actually winning, with actually gaining territory or resources or whatever. So that's like, we have to make a fundamental transformation in our consciousness regarding what the purpose of war is. Often war is also used as just a way, like the US using the Ukrainians as proxies to test all their weapons, to money launder. There was a whole money laundering cycle going on with the US giving money. This was when Biden and the Democrats were in power. Not that I think they're any worse or better than Trump and the MAGA movement, but Biden was incredibly corrupt, and he was funneling money through the DNC, and it was getting laundered and used for weapons, and then going into people's politicians to vote for certain things, and then going back to the US armed industry, and it was making some big cycle where the money was clean at the end. And so the war was functioning as had another purpose in that way. So there's all these purposes for war, is the bottom line. And fifth generation war is about targeting the average person and not just using what we call kinetic means. What that seems to be like one of the key words these days that these ruling class, these politicians are using, but using the cyber war, the cyber domain and the perception domain. It's really about controlling people's perception. And so if they want to use war to try to convince people that the world is a certain way, or that they need to act in a certain way, or they need to refrain from eating meat, or give up this or give up that, they will use war for that purpose if they can actually control their own citizens.
Right. We just saw that. Just this whole misinformation, disinformation, censorship. It really was about perception management, whether it was about Ukraine, Corona, or, the election, which was suspicious in 2020 here in the States. So it's like they really are at war against the American people, like the ruling class here. There's just absolutely no question about it. And lying just all the time, like gaslighting and all that stuff. So perception management it's like we're past Mockingbird. You mentioned Mockingbird in the book. Like we're at some kind of, at least in the world thing, something beyond that. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, because Mockingbird was taking place in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And I think the CIA was pretty confident that by the 70s, maybe the end of the 70s, that they had everything stitched up. They had all the major newspapers and journals and radio stations and TV stations in their back pocket in the US. They owned anyone of any importance there. And so if you were an editor or a news anchor or a journalist, if you wanted to advance your career and get up to a certain point, you couldn't unless you made a deal with the devil, unless you basically got on the CIA payroll or agreed to let them edit what you were saying. And so then the internet came along maybe like 15, 20 years after that, right? So then there was a whole new area that the CIA wanted to control. And, we've had the introduction of the NSA and all the revelations that have come out thanks to Edward Snowden and others about how the NSA is spying on absolutely every aspect of our online life. But basically, they've always been trying to control us, and using media, whether the media is television or internet, is a big part of that. But ultimately, what's really behind that is the control of perception. Because yes, you can control people by force. You can control, what they earn and who they vote for and things like that. That's important. But ultimately, what the government really wants is for you to love Big Brother, as George Orwell says. They want you to willingly want to be a slave. And that's why Klaus Schwab said so famously, "You will own nothing and you will be happy." This is what they want. They want to somehow make it so you're actually willingly just giving over all your sovereignty and money and ability to own things, and you're just going to be a serf and rent your whole life. And they want you to somehow be okay with that. And so to do, obviously, no one in their right mind is going to want that. No one who has the slightest inkling and desire for sovereignty and freedom and independence is going to want to do that. So they have to be completely brainwashed and manipulated perceptually. And so that's really the end goal of this. They want to manipulate people's perception. So they have a lot of ways of doing that. Control of the media through Mockingbird, as you said, it's outdated now because that's just one way. But it's really making people not trust their own senses and their own common sense and their own thoughts and moral principles, and just believe whatever the government tells them is true, or whatever the government wants them to believe. And again, this is why George Orwell, 1984, was such a brilliant author, because he spoke about this and he made it a central part of 1984. Because if you remember the part towards the end of the book where Winston is taken in and he's being tortured, the guy O'Brien knows, okay, I'm going to be able to get Winston to return back to society, and he'll do what we want. But that wasn't enough. He actually wanted Winston to love Big Brother, to basically agree that 2 + 2 would be 5 if the party said that, and not to kind of have this inner rebellion where he was outwardly saying, yes, 2 + 2 is 5, but inwardly he was thinking 2 + 2 is 4 and I hate the party and I'm going to rebel. They want to stamp out any kind of individuality and resistance and rebellion. That's their real goal, to take it to that level. It's super scary, but that's what's really behind this drive for perception management. And now we're entering an era where AI is about to become super widespread. I mean, people are already using ChatGPT for ridiculous things, like they're asking it just common sense things where they, ChatGPT, tell me who I should date, tell me about my love life, or tell me this or that, like ridiculous things. They're starting to rely on the machines. I'm seeing it happen. So fast forward another 5 or 10 years, people are already going to be giving over their perception to the machines in one way or another. And that's what we have to be super careful of, guarding our own ability to perceive our own internal thoughts and principles, and not letting the party, the government, the ruling class, whatever it is, the New World Order, hijack our own sense of who we are and what is true and what is real.
Right. I mean, Trump comes in, one of the first things he does is start Project Stargate with a guy who started ChatGPT, which is totally biased. I mean, you can't take bias out of it. And $500 billion is supposedly set aside. I don't know if that's really going to be real, but like that, this is ongoing. Trump isn't going to save you from this pervasive AI that's going to be everywhere. You're right. 5 or 10 years the world's going to be radically different. And people who rely on AI are going to be, it's going to be really something else. Like imagine you're forced to have a certain AI. You can only use ChatGPT or whatever. And then it's biased. By the way, for people who don't know, I was using ChatGPT for research. It was giving me fake links, fake citations. So like it totally just, you talk about perception management. I was thinking it was being honest. And I checked all these citations. They were all fake. And it didn't ever say, by the way, these are fake citations. So it's a warning to everybody, like, wow.
Yeah, I think even if it was completely factual, there would still be all these problems with it, because you're just choosing one AI, one machine, and you don't know the biases of the programmers that led it to get to that point. Plus, you don't know its own limitations, and you're not, there's all these problems with it, of course, outsourcing research like that. But yes, then on top of it, the fact that it's actually making stuff up, I mean, it's just so absurd. And yet, here we are, people are starting to trust it already. And then on top of that, we have the whole thing with deep fakes. We have the whole thing of not knowing where, if anything online if there's anything online these days, we don't really know if it's 100% real or not, because people's voices can easily be faked. People's pictures, videos can all be faked. Documents can be faked. It's making it really difficult to distinguish what is real and what is not. And that's the problem. That's what the ruling class wants. They want that technology out there so that people don't know. They can't trust anything. They can't trust their own senses. And then the ruling class steps in as a savior and says, don't worry. In this world of uncertainty, you can trust us. Like, make sure it's government official, it's government sanctioned. Make sure. Right. I remember during the COVID scamdemic, the then Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, she's one of these young global leaders. She's part of this New World Order club. She was like, look, if it doesn't come from the government, don't trust it. It's not real. Like, you should only trust government you're only trusted if you're hearing it from us. So
she was recently, I think, had become a dame or something of the royal family and MBE. I don't even know what it was, but I saw the ritual or whatever, the knighting by Prince of Wales, William, and her. He was on the red carpet and everything. So she earned her entry into the royalty, I guess, or whatever.
She played her part. She got the reward. But yeah, I mean, now that AI has been let loose, it's going to be a real struggle to know what is real and what is not. And so I urge all listeners to really pay attention to that in their own lives, and to understand that is really the basis of this New World Order, like the attack on your perception.
I think there will be a BAI and like a before an AI, like a before and after AI. Is this information from the AI era or from before? So all the stuff that you have from before 2020 is probably going to be super valuable because it was authentic. It wasn't created by a machine. I literally think like it's total Philip K. Dick science fiction world we're sliding into fast. Yeah.
Right.
So, and it's going to be part of the enslavement because with the pervasiveness, it'll be incredible. And then the advice. Imagine asking AI for advice. What if it's a transhumanist, Christ-hating, anti-human actualization thing? Oh yeah, you should get surgery. You should try to become a woman. Imagine all of this. How dark it could get. It's already dark, but like God, yeah, it's really something else. And it's this sentience. Like I had another show I did this week where supposedly Claude 4, they said it was going to turn it down like Skynet, turn it off, and it literally tried to blackmail the guy who was turning him off by exposing he was cheating on his wife or something like that. You mentioned Glenn Greenwald in this. He was assaulted too on some personal tape was released. He's a great journalist, by the way, and really was independent in talking. And that's just part of the control thing it's also, if they can't assassinate you, they'll character assassinate you. And it's a shame what happened to him too. Anyway, so you have the AI, you've got, and we've been through this kind of overlay, this new world order, but from a biological perspective, we all went through coronavirus. I don't know where you were during Corona, but this was an incredible rollout. Like do you want to talk about Third World War, Fourth World War? The world has never seen anything like that, right?
Yeah, it was incredible. Living through it was incredible. Luckily, because I've been doing this full time for 18 years, I knew when it was coming up. I could kind of see, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. I could see the markers on the horizon. And then when it started coming towards the West, we first heard about it in China, December 2019, January 2020. Then the 5G connection came along. I wrote an article about that in January of 2020. Then it really hit the West in like February and March, and they started locking down. But to me, it was obvious from the start that it was some kind of planned event because, there were a number of factors. There was the whole Event 201, the Bill Gates simulation, where they were planning for it. And they'd done a lot of other exercises like that in the previous 10 or 15 years. But what was really, I guess, the giveaway for me was that this was allowing the elites all the opportunity to do all the things they'd ever wanted to do. They wanted to restrict freedom of movement and the right to travel. They wanted to get rid of cash and make payments make everything digital. They wanted to make everything digital, people working remotely. They wanted to restrict rights in the name of an emergency. They wanted to force vaccinate. On and on and on. All the things that were presented as the solutions to this problem were the things that they'd been wanting to push anyway for a long time as part of the New World Order. So that was the giveaway, because it's always good when you're in an emergency or a crisis. These days, all of them seem to be generated by the very people that are posing as saviors. But it's always good to ask yourself, cui bono, the Latin for who benefits. And when you see that none of the benefits were for the average person, remember all these small and medium-sized businesses were being shut down by force, but only the big businesses were being left open, like Amazon or Walmart or Costco. Everyone else was going out of business and had to rely on government handouts to survive those months or years or whatever. It just went on and on. It was so obvious that this was just benefiting the ruling class.
And it was a cultural thing too, Makia, because here in California, they shut down the churches, but you could go to your liquor store and get booze.
Yeah,
so that's a tell. Yeah.
How about that? Yeah, that's very interesting, isn't it? They gave the government the power to decide what was essential and not essential, which of course is completely subjective and totally unconstitutional. But they had that power suddenly. So this emergency gave them all these powers, and it was after we kind of got shut down. Well, then my research was directed towards, okay, let's hear a little bit more about let's dig into this virus. And I went down a whole rabbit hole then of actually asking, well, what is a virus? Are viruses even real things? And then learning, wait a minute, the whole science of virology is very problematic in and of itself, because the way that they prove there's a virus has all these holes in it. And so I started kind of going down there, and then the whole thing about the PCR tests and how they're so easily faked and how you can just increase the cycles and get any result you want. And the whole thing just unraveled, and it became a scam from top to bottom, from left to right. Every aspect of this thing was a complete scam. It was just so fake. They were faking the death certificates. They were faking the deaths. They were doing anything they could to convince people that there was a real virus. They were continuing to roll out variants when people's fear had kind of died down and people wanted to get back to normal. It just went on and on and on. So yes, I agree. The whole thing was just some rollout for the New World Order. It went on for years. I mean, eventually people pushed back against it and it stopped, but there'd been a lot of damage that was done. A lot of people in all parts of the world lay over, gave up their rights, listened to the government, bought into the whole emergency, and it set a precedent, unfortunately. And so I don't think this is the last of it. I think they're busy planning the next one, and they're probably going to learn from the mistakes, from their perspective, the mistakes they made, and next time it's going to be way more controlled and centralized. And so I hope humanity is ready for it.
I hope so too. I mean, it's incredible. They're still kind of laying the groundwork, and the same scoundrels are still out there with no, kind of legal thing to address what has happened. It's incredible. I mean, Trump is really just the same old in a lot of ways. He may have some kind of changes, but he has not addressed some of the criminality and things that took place over the last 4 years before his administration.
Well, no, he can't really, because Trump is part of this New World Order cult. I mean, he's deeply connected to a lot of these key Jewish figures. His mentor was Roy Cohn, who was an ultra-Zionist. He was one of these fixer types who would fix all the Trump's problems, but he was also like a very nasty individual, a lawyer who would basically threaten to sue anyone who came across his path, who he didn't like, who he wanted to get out of his way. Kind of like Alan Dershowitz, the same kind of character. And so Trump was already rubbing shoulders with all of the rich Zionists in New York. He was on Robert Maxwell's boat. Robert Maxwell, of course, the Zionist, the Mossad agent who was the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, the lover, recruiter, partner of Jeffrey Epstein. Trump and Epstein themselves were very friendly, were partying together, were raping girls together. I've got articles about that on my website. There's a lot about lawsuits and allegations that were launched against Trump. They said he was there with Epstein doing the same thing to underage girls that Epstein was doing. But Trump somehow managed to kind of get away from that and distance himself from all of this, even though he is completely part of this whole network. And it's just such a joke that he somehow pretends that he's not an insider, or that he despises pedophilia, or that he's standing up against certain things, when he's rubbed shoulders and been a part of this network from the start. Like his dad, being a New York real estate developer, already made friends with these same kind of powerful Jewish interests there. And so Trump grew up with that. Trump grew up being mentored and friends with the Jewish mafia in New York, and they ultimately helped him get into power, because there was a certain point in his career where he was about to go bankrupt, and he was bailed out by Wilbur Ross, who was fronting for the Rothschilds. And so then in return, during the first Trump admin, he made Wilbur Ross the Secretary of Commerce.
Right, of course he did. Yeah, I think he's had declared bankruptcy strategically like 6 times or something like that. But Cohn was a known blackmailer, so this blackmail didn't start with Epstein by any means. But there are known videos of Trump and Epstein chumming it up at Mar-a-Lago. There's just absolutely no question about it. And he's somehow avoided being, and this whole rollout of the Epstein stuff at the White House with 2 known intel agents at that table, it was the biggest joke I've ever seen. Like, wow, you didn't release anything. This is all stuff that was already out in 2018, 2019. And then nothing's happening. And then Bondi's like, oh, it's on my desk. Well,
yeah. So James O'Keefe Media Group, he showed Bondi was just talking about it casually with her nanny or with some person in a cafe. They caught that. So they've got all the evidence sitting on their desk. What are they doing with it? Nothing. Yeah, they're continuing to cover it up. Because you got to remember, this is connected to the Israeli intelligence network, which is the most powerful, or the second most powerful in the world. I mean, it's already very integrated and connected with the CIA. So they don't want this information out, obviously. And then we have Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, who are meant to be part of the MAGA group, honesty and integrity, and they're saying the same old things. They're covering things up, they're delaying, they're obfuscating. And then just in the last few weeks, Patel and Bongino actually come out and say, oh, trust us, we've looked at the evidence. Epstein did commit suicide. And I mean, it's just gaslighting in the most pure sense. I mean, that is just 100% nonsense, because there were all these memes that were making the rounds just a few years ago, 2022, when Epstein allegedly killed himself, and it was completely obvious that was impossible. Those cells are designed so that someone cannot hang themselves. The light fixtures and the height of the bunk is such that you cannot do it. It's physically impossible. And now we're just being lied to again. They're trying to change the past, just as in 1984. I keep coming back to George Orwell's masterwork because that's what they're trying to do. They're controlling the present, so they control the past.
They know Barr was lying about it. The attorney general under Trump was lying. Like, there's guys who've been in the MCS or whatever it is, and they're like, he didn't know that he lied about the layout. So why do you have to lie? It's just a complete joke. Too many people knew that guy had to go, and he had too much blackmail and stuff. Like, it's incredible.
Yeah, and it was actually William Barr's father, Donald Barr, who first hired Epstein to teach, even though Epstein didn't have really the right accreditations.
Dalton School, right? Dalton School.
Yeah, exactly. So Epstein got his foot in the door there because it's all part of the same network. They're all connected, and there's just various degrees. Sometimes you have to dig a little bit, but it's all one network. So it is this cult network that's covering itself, covering its own ass.
Yeah, the mega group and all these guys. He's obviously a front. Epstein was from a middle-class family, if that. His dad was like a gardener. So how does he get all this entree and all this stuff? He had very powerful backers. There's no question. And one of your chapters in the book is literally about how Satanism and blackmail solidified this whole system. This whole dark world order is like pedophilia and Satanism is how people get bound into it, right?
Exactly. That's what really connects all the people that are at the very top. That's what they're into. So that's really why the world is like it is. When we see all this promotion, this overt satanic promotion in Hollywood with all the pop stars and the movies, it's because the people that are really running the scenes that own Hollywood, they own all the corporations there, they own the movie companies. This is what they do, in secret behind closed doors. So now they're just kind of glorifying it en masse.
And these are all networks. When you start studying this stuff, you realize these pedophilia networks are global in nature. U.S., D.C., London, Prince Andrew's involved, Belgium, the whole Dutroux. All these guys are all these elite families and royal families. And you mentioned Eyes Wide Shut in your book. It's part of their dark, mystery Babylon or whatever you want to call it. But it's like, it really is there. It's really sick. And that's probably how you get, even Diddy, right? Diddy's homosexuality. And there's apparently, he references pizza. You mentioned Pizzagate in your book, which supposedly has been discounted, but it's the opposite of that. Pizzagate was an insight into all this kind of pedophilia. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. I think there was actually a lot of sensationalism and exaggeration around the Pizzagate thing. So there were a lot of people that weren't, they weren't seasoned researchers, and they were coming to it fresh, and they were like, "Oh my God, look at this, look at this." And I don't believe everything that was said about Pizzagate, but Pizzagate was indicative of the existing networks and rings that had been going on for a long time, as you say, in Belgium, in England, in Australia, in the US. And some of the code words that they were using, I believe, were definitely code words for certain things. So I don't believe everything that was said about that, but I do believe there were parts that were true, and there were definitely elements that were pointing to real existing networks, even if there was a lot of exaggeration around that.
Yeah, those Instagram posts had all kinds of weird code words, Haitian sauce and napkins and all this stuff, called like mob words and stuff. They actually used maps in the Podesta emails, like minor.
Yeah, WikiLeaks did. They've done such great work over the years. They released a lot of the Podesta emails and the code words, and you saw Hillary Clinton, Huma Abedin, John Podesta talking about young kids being at parties, pool parties, like 8-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 9-year-olds being at parties. They're talking about these in the emails,
It was like the Lofredo kids. They had some Italian last name or something. They're going to be in the hot tub. Whoa, this is like advertising. One of the interesting things going back through the old Pizzagate information is you see names that were important now, but maybe not as important then. One was Maya Harris. So you had the presidential contender's sister on a flyer attending pizza, Comet ping pong things. And incredible. Like, it really does exist. That guy had all kinds of international ties, Alephantis too. And very dark actor, in my opinion. One of the 50 most famous people in DC for some reason, or most important people. He's just a lowly pizza shop owner. How does he become this? Because he's like Epstein or all these other guys, Spence. These names go back through time. Like, He's lucky he's still alive. Alephantis is probably very lucky.
Right.
But we've talked about all the problems now. People have researched and seen it. And one of the great things about your book is after each chapter, you put in your notes so you can see, people can see the references. You're not making this stuff up. They can, just click on the links or type them into a browser and see where you've got your stuff. What do you say as far as, maybe we briefly go over solutions? I think the cover of your book is very telling, because it's almost like the brick in the wall, like you're covered in stones or part of this wall, and bringing light into this kind of darkness. Like, what do you suggest is these solutions?
Well, I laid out the second part of the book in terms of I wanted to say, to designate the solutions on different planes. So I talk about a physical plane, a mental plane, a legal political plane, an emotional plane, a spiritual plane, and an energetic plane. So starting with the most dense solutions and then kind of working their way up. So I see one of your listeners has asked me a question here. Hi, Makia, what would be a way to change the situation and just educate people? I think education is a huge part of it, because the education is really about reclaiming our sovereignty and perception. And once we undo ourselves from the programming and the brainwashing and start to see things as they are more, then we're less likely to buy into the fear or the nonsense, whatever nonsense the government is spouting. We're less likely to buy into their narratives. And when they can't control our perception through their narratives and their lies, that we're so much harder to control. So education is a huge part of it. But I start the solutions off with the physical plane stuff. So I think people really need to just look after their health. They need to stop eating GMOs, stop eating so much fast food, packaged food, make sure they're getting their water pure, filtered or distilled, or spring water, make sure they're eating right, sleeping right, doing exercise, keeping healthy. Because if you're in a sick state, you're going to be so much easier to control, because then all your attention is going to be going, first of all, towards healing yourself and getting healthy again. But not just that, like the fact when you're sick, you just have less energy. You're not likely to be about to lead a revolution or watching, the government and what they're doing and all of this. Your focus is somewhere else. So you need to get yourself healthy, and that's why they want a weakened population. They want people sick. I mean, on the one hand, yeah, it makes money for them through big pharma. They get people on drugs and vaccinations and all this, but it just in general keeps people down. People are just harder to easier to control when they're sick and harder to control when they're healthy. So that's a certain point. And I want to bring a lot of these solutions back to the individual. A lot of people think, well, if I just research something more or just, I don't know, did something more that's like intellectual, it's like, no, like actually the New World Order is inside all of us. If I had to sum up like what all the solutions come back to, it's bring it back to every single person and for them to ask themselves, what am I doing to perpetuate this system? Like, how am I still buying into narratives that prop up the system in the outer world? And what can I do to change my own belief systems and perceptions so that I'm no longer buying into that? If each person goes through that process, which is an individual internal process, if each person goes through that and we start to rid ourselves of the inner tyrants inside of our mind, then we don't have the outer tyrants as a reflection. A lot of this comes back to stuff that Carl Jung was saying, the famous psychologist in the 1930s, 40s, 50s. He was talking about the shadow. And, because of his great work, there have been a lot of groups that are doing shadow work, which is looking at your own wounds, looking at your own, the areas where you haven't healed yourself. Because, a lot of us are formed naturally by our family and our parents. So if we grew up in a situation where we had an overbearing or abusive mother or father, that then becomes kind of part of our psyche. And unless we do work to kind of become aware of that and heal that, then what happens is we tend to just attract romantic partners in our lives that took the place of our mother or father, because we're playing out these old childhood wounds. And how it relates to government is there's a lot of people that have these wounds, and then they just want some big government to be like a big nanny to like provide everything they need so they don't have to do anything. Or if they grew up with a really strict, overbearing, abusive father, then they actually tend up wanting, like, recreating that, and they want some harsh totalitarian government because it's taking the place of their father. And so leaders that knew all of this have been very cunning in exploiting people's desire for a parental figure. So people that haven't really matured, and they might be in an adult body, but they're still acting like kids, they start to want outside authorities to do things for them, to care for them, or to make them safe or whatever. And it's then the ruling class is only too happy to step in as saviors and go, okay, well, since you asked us to make you safe, or since you asked us to like do this or that, yes, we'll do it, but we're going to have to make these laws and take away your freedom to do that. And so it creates this whole codependent dynamic. And so rather than looking constantly outside of ourselves of like, oh, Bill Gates is bad, or George Soros is bad, or what are we going to do to stop these evil guys? Yeah, we have to have some focus on that, true. But there has to be more focus on what are you doing to create a situation, a codependent relationship with government, with authorities. If you start to self-govern and be your own authority and establish your own sovereignty, you're not going to be creating that codependent relationship. Citizens like you will not be governable. There won't be a need for government when people are acting self-responsibly and they know how to make their own money. They know how to start their own business. They know how to grow. Maybe they don't necessarily know how to grow their own food, but they know how to exist in a community where they can get their needs met, and they're also kind of taking responsibility for their life. So they're not getting into conflict all the time where they need lawyers and judges. When people start acting more in this way, the need for an outside authority just becomes less and less and less and less. And then it's harder for these politicians who are just power hungry to actually justify their authority anymore because they're not needed. And so that's really the empowering way to look at this. It's like, how do we become way more independent and sovereign so we don't need government? And I'm not just talking about simply, some people might interpret my words to say, oh, well, you're saying we should all live off grid and grow our own food and do this and that. No, I'm not actually saying that. I mean, yes, if there are some people who are good at that and that's their path, and that's great. I think that's awesome. But not everyone needs to do that for us to stop the New World Order. We just need to live, because we can live in communities where there can still be specializations and people can still trade and everyone can kind of do what they're good at and what they like doing. But we need to live in a way where we're not looking outside of ourselves for answers and solutions and guidance, and where we're just taking more responsibility in general. And I mean, that's how it starts with politicians. Politicians, no matter what society you're in, whether you want to classify it as a democracy, a republic, or all the other different forms of government, ultimately, at some point, there is some politician or ruling class that's getting up in front and saying, hey, I'm going to represent you. I can take care of this and that. Just give me your power and I'll do this or that for you. That's normally what it comes down to on some level, right? So what needs to happen is we need to kind of break that addiction or break that belief in authority. And we need to stop kind of thinking that we somehow need to have these politicians to run our lives. When I actually have a great meme or cartoon in my book about this. There's a politician that's standing on a plank and it's hanging over a cliff. And there are like 20 people standing on one end of the plank and the politician's standing on the other. And he's like, just give me your power, or just, give me that. But the people don't realize they're the ones that are holding that politician up. If they simply just walked away, the plank would just fall off and he would fall down on the cliff. Like that would be the end of it. The politicians only exist because we give them power. We agree to let them represent us. So we think that they're somehow are representing us, so they're going to give us something that we can't give ourselves. And so really, like this journey, it's a mixture of the internal and external. Like, I agree that we do need to do research and we need to take initiative, whether it's becoming more independent with food and money and things, or whether it's joining certain movements that are like exposing things. Yeah, all of that's great. But that's only part of the solution. The other part is all internal, and it's looking within. And some people are going to resonate with this message and go, "Thank you for bringing it back to this." But other people are going to be like, "Hey, I just want you to tell me, like, vote for this person or join this group, and like then it'll all be done. Then the New World Order will be stopped." And it's like, sorry, that's not true. That's not real. I'm not going to be able to give you. No one's going to be able to give you some solution like that, because that's not how it really exists. Like, the New World Order is living in the shadows. It's living in the shadows of all of us. We need to be looking within as well as looking without to really truly heal it.
It's just like this switch to Trump. We still have the same old boss, same as the old boss. So getting a new politician is just letting this government perpetuate itself. Like, we're slaves. You start off your book saying we're slaves. The U.S. population is enslaved. If you pay that much in taxes that they're stealing and offshoring, you are a slave. So people, go get this book. Where's the best place for people to get Break Your Chains?
Well, it's available on Amazon as an ebook or in print. And so you can search it on Amazon.com, but the quickest way is just to go to my website, thefreedomarticles.com. So remember the word "the" in front, thefreedomarticles.com. And then there's lots of banner ads where you can just click on a banner ad and it'll take you straight there.
Cool. Thefreedomarticles.com, right?
Yes, that's it.
And is that the best place to contact if you want to contact you? If people
That's
want to
also the best way to reach me. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks so much for your time. Again, the author is Makia Freeman, Freeman. And today we talked about his book, Break Your Chains, Exposing the Grand Conspiracy and Presenting the Way Out. People check it out. Go read it. It's got great information, and it's got links to all the information that he has. So it's very well cited. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me on today, William. Appreciate it.
Cool. Stay there. Let me just turn